Was Einstein a mystic? If you're here and listening to this podcast, you're probably wondering if this is just another purposefully provocative headline, like all the others littered across YouTube and podcast apps everywhere, just begging for attention. But here's the deal. When you dive down into some of the things that were said by not only Einstein, but the other great theoretical physicists, astrophysicists, and mathematicians over the years, you find you end up in a very funky place. Some would say an unscientific place, and maybe, just maybe, a place with deep mystical influence. So I think there is a legitimate question to ask, which is as follows. As the great scientists, scientific geniuses to be precise, rack their brains examining the fundamental questions of the universe or existence itself, do they become more reflective, more spiritual, more, I guess, religious, for lack of a better word? That's where we are going to go today. Thanks for joining our most recent episode. I know your time is valuable, so thank you so much for listening and spending some time with us. Okay, here at Fuzz Sutra, our goal is to dive into obscure topics, sometimes random, sometimes not, but topics that are not brought up elsewhere typically, are highly intriguing, and which draw upon common threads that bind them together. Our goal is to uncover these threads and then eventually knit these together into a theory of everything. One quick note if you are listening on podcast, the YouTube version of this will have a bunch of visuals that you might find helpful. So feel free to head over there if you need a little bit of visual assistance with this, because it's going to get dense. As we mentioned, today we're going to ask the question, as scientists, particularly those at the forefront of theoretical physics, mathematics, and astrophysics, get, or I guess got, deeper and deeper into the nature of reality, do they become more reflective, more spiritual, or more religious? Again, for lack of a better word. In short, was Einstein a mystic? Okay, here's how we're going to do that. We're going to profile a bunch of scientists, particularly those on the forefront of theoretical physics and quantum theory in particular. We are going to discuss who they are, what they discovered, and then examine the positions that they took on philosophic matters. In many cases, this devolves into a discussion of consciousness. This was actually surprising to me, how so many of them start out studying gravity, relativity, quantum theory, or whatever, and then eventually they start to tie it all into consciousness. But we'll get to this later. Okay, before we jump in, there are a couple of caveats I also want to mention. The first is that this is a Eurocentric discussion. I'm going to focus primarily on European and American thinkers. This is not to suggest that there were not great thinkers coming out of the Islamic world or the Chinese world, the Japanese world, or India or other traditions in the past. But when I got into the thick of this research, many of the characters involved in these discussions were centered around the late 19th century and heading into the 20th century, particularly around the explosion of insight gained into astrophysics and quantum theory during this time. Much of this thought was led by European and American thinkers, men in particular, due to geopolitical and socio-cultural realities around this time. Let's start with a brief reminder and maybe like a super high-level history of science in the West. Here in the Eurocentric world, we had an explosion of knowledge which occurred during the times of ancient Greece and heading into the Roman world. This is let's say 2,000 some years ago. This included numerous discoveries, the creation of new disciplines, and the overall advancement of scientific thought. The scientific method and the use of empirical data and reason were being developed and brought to the forefront of thought during this time. Just by way of example of one of these ancient discoveries and what was going on during this time, the most recognizable of these perhaps was the Pythagorean theory about triangles. This states that in a right-handed triangle, the square of the length of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. You'll remember this from geometry in probably like the 7th grade. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is a well-known example of the science being advanced in the ancient world, particularly Greece, as the West opened itself up to geometry, also mathematics, cosmology, philosophy, and even advances in music. After the fall of Rome, the Western world went dark for hundreds of years. Science was so shrouded that we indeed now call this the Dark Ages of Europe, which lasted from the fall of the Roman Empire around, say, 500 AD until at least 1000 AD, and some extended to 1500 AD. During this time, nearly, that's like 1,000 years, Western thought was consumed more by superstition, myth, and theology than scientific advancement. It should be noted that during this time there was a massive shift in the center of scientific inquiry and even the advancement of the scientific method itself to the Islamic world as they carried the mantle of discovery forward. The European mind began to get back on track in the Renaissance, which began in northern Italy and expanded eventually across most of the European continent, beginning in like the 15th and 16th centuries. The arts, philosophy, invention, and scientific inquiry began to flourish again. It is from this time, for example, that we get two thinkers who had some interesting things to say, which we will begin with to impress upon us what's going to come. First is Leonardo da Vinci himself, the quintessential Renaissance man. In fact, his name is basically synonymous with the term Renaissance man. He lived in the birthplace of the Renaissance in northern Italy from 1452 to 1519. Da Vinci is, of course, known for the famous painting The Mona Lisa, also The Last Supper, and some other seriously insane paintings. But he was also known for advancing the study of anatomy, biology, and other subjects, hence the term the Renaissance man. Da Vinci said, "Study the science of art, study the art of science, develop your senses, especially learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else." This quote is not just important for this episode, as it is one of the earliest Western scientific minds we have in writing to begin to grapple with the meaning of all things, and in so doing, realizing how everything seems to be tied together. But it could almost serve as a standalone marketing slogan for this podcast in general. It's what we're looking to do. I should note here that I tried to find the original source text for this quote and came up empty-handed. It's been around for a long, long time and has been attributable to Da Vinci, but the source text has been lost to history. However, we do know his contemporaries were saying similar things here at the beginning of the Renaissance, saying things like everything is tied together and connected to everything else. For example, let me make sure I get this name right, Theophrastus Bombast von Hohenheim, also known simply as Paracelsus, was a direct contemporary of Da Vinci and lived from 1493 to 1551, thus overlapping the latter 3 decades of Da Vinci's life. I actually don't know why his name was changed to Paracelsus, but had my name been Theophrastus Bombast von Hohenheim, I would have made a change also. Anyway, Paracelsus was a Swiss physician, philosopher, and one of the founders of modern medicine. He is attributed to being one of the first to bring stringent scientific method to the medical field and is known as the father of toxicology. If you went to med school, you may know who he was, or if you ever got a DWI. Paracelsus got his medical degree from the University of Ferrara, so he possibly overlapped directly with Da Vinci along the way and was instrumental in spreading the Renaissance into Germany. He was very much a theologian in a deeply studied amateur kind of way, so like Da Vinci, he was very much a Renaissance man as well. In any event, Paracelsus tells us, quote, "There is an internal sun, which is the source of all wisdom, and those whose spiritual senses have wakened to life will see that sun and be conscious of its existence. But those who have not attained spiritual consciousness may yet feel its power by an internal faculty which is called intuition." Like Da Vinci, I had trouble finding the source material for this quote, but if you look up Paracelsus and read biographies of him, you will find he is positively swimming in mysticism, particularly kind of like a hermetic kind. Thus, it's not out of bounds to suggest that this indeed came from him, and, most importantly, to know that at the beginning of the Renaissance, when people were beginning to rebel at the strict theology of the Catholic Church, when scientific thought was beginning to stir again across the European world, that it seems that much of this movement was firmly rooted in the mystical ideas that we're going to talk about in the podcast today. Okay, so let's finally get into it. I mean, we are already into it, but let's get into some modern scientists, including Einstein, and get to the heart of the question that we are asking. We are going to go through these guys chronologically for lack of a better approach. First, Tesla. And no, not the car brand. The namesake of the cars Elon Musk sells was a man named Nikola Tesla. He was a Serbian born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1856 and lived until his death in New York City in 1943. At the age of 28, he immigrated to the United States, where he had a prolific career as an inventor and scientist. He made major contributions to the study of electricity, what it is, how it's transmitted, how it can be used. He even invented one of the first known wireless vehicles. And also, do you know AC/DC? It stands for alternating current and direct current, two ways that electricity can be delivered. On a side note, have you ever noticed how nearly every short on YouTube uses AC/DC's song Thunderstruck as the backdrop? What is up with this? Is it just the most recognizable song you can get a license to? Anyway, all right, okay, so Tesla developed one of the early motors that brought us the AC, or alternating current, which is still widely used around the world today. From this heavy metal background, Nikola Tesla said, "When we speak of man, we have a conception of humanity as a whole. And before applying scientific methods to the investigation of his movement, we must accept this as a physical fact. These ties cannot be seen, but we can feel them. I cut myself in the finger, and it pains me. This finger, it's a part of me. I see a friend get hurt, and it hurts me too. My friend and I are one. And now I see stricken down an enemy. I care least for that enemy, and still it grieves me. Does this not prove that each of us is only part of a whole? The Buddhist expresses it one way, the Christian expresses it another, but both say the same: we are all one." This is from Nikola Tesla, the Tesla Papers, which I'll put the link to in the description. His other quotes include such gems as, quote, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." Okay, so let's talk about mysticism here before we get any further, so we can ground ourselves in a definition that we can align some of these quotes to. The definition of mysticism you'll find in Webster's dictionary is: 1. The experience of mystical union or direct communion with ultimate reality reported by mystics. 2. The belief that direct knowledge of God, spiritual truth, or ultimate reality can be attained through subjective experience, such as intuition or insight. 3. A. Vague speculation, a belief without sound basis. 3b, a theory postulating the possibility of direct and intuitive acquisition of ineffable knowledge or power. So it's kind of a circular argument. Mysticism is that which is propounded by mystics. Mystics are those who propound mysticism. It's the direct experience that seems to be important to mystics. In other words, to a mystic, there is no such thing as I believe in this or I believe in that. It's only have I experienced it. It's also interesting in section 3a of that definition that mysticism can be used disparagingly. This is what those without personal experience would call experiences described by others. It's also interesting because the scientists in the study would be the least likely people to state things as such. But they are telling us what they have seen based on their own experience. Whether or not we believe it is an entirely different matter. Certain Eastern philosophies, such as certain strains of Buddhism and Hinduism, lean into this experience idea in a big way, but there are also important denominations of the big monotheistic faiths that espouse generally the same ideas. The Gnostics in Christianity, for example. Other examples would include the Sufis of Islam and the Kabbalists of Judaism. There are various strains, schools of thought, and denominations of all these groups, but there are some general views that they all hold in common. The first, change is the only constant in the universe. The second, try to live a balanced life. 3, morality and practice compound on top of each other. 4, regular practice is important. This includes meditation, silent prayer, and a variety of other contemplative practices, like the Sufi dervishes, for example, whose practice includes a form of meditative twirling or dancing. Number 5, through a meditative practice, one can transcend everyday thought and achieve a greater consciousness. From this perspective, the mystics think that consciousness is not a state of being able to think, but a transcendent state that encompasses everything that can be achieved. In short, what one sees and feels around them does not necessarily exist in their mind. There is like a truer like reality beyond. Number 6, when this is achieved, the practitioner experiences that everything is connected. Those who are super well practiced claim to realize that everything is actually one. Some describe this everything as like some sort of energy or some sort of vibration. Number 7, when a practitioner does this, they achieve some sort of enlightenment or understanding, or what the Buddhists would call nirvana. They can draw on this bliss whenever they want to overcome fear, attachments, and negative thoughts. And last, number 8, This state of enlightenment is impossible to communicate to anybody who hasn't had a similar experience. Those who have experienced it are kind of like in a unique club and can only discuss that experience among themselves. Now, if you haven't tried any of those practices, this will sound like complete nonsense, and I totally get that. But what we are going to find as we continue down this path is that it seems these scientists have engaged in a sort of meditative practice through their science and have come to similar conclusions. And I think that's super bizarre. That's why we're here. Okay, now we have a definition down of mysticism, and so if we return to Nikola Tesla's words, you will see a bunch of themes in common here. He literally says, quote, "We are all one," end quote. And that the Buddhists and the Christians both express this, but they do it in different ways. And that the secrets of the universe will be answered in terms of energy or vibrations. So along these lines, our next thinker, Max Planck, was a German theoretical physicist born in 1858. And man, if you look at his picture, he looks like anything but a mystic. If you're listening on podcasts, you can check out our YouTube video for some visuals that are going to accompany all of this. Anyway, he was one of the originators of quantum theory and a founder of modern physics. He added to Einstein's theory of relativity and was involved in discoveries related to thermodynamics and quantum physics, among a variety of other things. A quick note here, because we're going to say the word quantum a lot. Quantum theory includes quantum physics or quantum mechanics and is the study of physics and other disciplines that occur at the scale or at scale smaller than the atom, particularly the behavior of light and matter in these very, very small areas. Even though it was just invented this past century and is highly theoretical, its theories have been tested repeatedly and have been found to be highly accurate. In fact, they're some of the most accurate theories ever devised by mankind. Some of the actual theory behind this stuff is pretty effing crazy. One of my favorites, for example, is how a particle exists in every state or in every probability until it is observed. More on this later in a discussion about a dying cat. No, seriously, we're going to have a discussion about a dying cat. But for now, just know that this guy, Max Planck, was on the forefront of major theoretical understandings of the universe. Without it, many of our inventions would not work, including microprocessors found in computers, GPS systems, the laser, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Basically, modern life as we know it could not exist without quantum theory. Anyway, after decades of work and extensive effort in understanding the behavior of light and matter in the most smallest of measures, Max Planck said things like, quote, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness," end quote. This comes from an interview he gave with The Observer, 25th of January, 1931. He also said, quote, "We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter." When asked about religion, Max Planck also said, quote, "There can never be any real opposition between religion and science, for the one is the complement of the other. Every serious and reflective person realizes, I think, that the religious element in his nature must be recognized and cultivated if all the powers of the human soul are to act together in perfect balance and harmony. And indeed, it was not by accident that the greatest thinkers of all ages were deeply religious souls," end quote. I should note here that on some of these, I'm going to give you the citation for the quote. On others, I'm going to forget. So I'll try to get them all into the description so you can check them out. Okay, so what do we have here with Max Planck? Well, we've got an argument for a pervasive universal consciousness and that everything is derivative from it. This is deeply mystical stuff. I will also mention I had to consolidate his quotes on these topics down to just these three. We could have done an entire podcast about this guy. Anyway, all of this made me begin to wonder if the study of this stuff is in and itself a contemplative act. That is, does the day-to-day mental exertion required to construct new hypotheses about the origination of matter, of light, of the inner workings of the universe, does this lead the thinker to the same place that meditation and similar practices lead mystics? It kind of seems so. So let's move on to Albert Einstein, one of the most famous scientists ever. One who probably the majority of Americans, at least those who are actually able to name a scientist, might name off the top of their head, and one whose haircut is synonymous with eccentric genius. Albert Einstein was a Jew who spent his early life between Switzerland and Germany. He moved to the United States when Adolf Hitler came to power for obvious reasons. Let's see, he was born in 1879. He died in 1955 at the age of 76. Einstein published more than 300 scientific papers. It is said that when his later letters and papers were formally released just recently in 2014, there were more than 30,000 documents. This breaks down to more than one per day. This guy was either reading or writing at least some major scientific document every single day of his life. He's best known probably for his theories on special relativity, which held that let me make sure I get this right. When measured in the frame of a relatively moving observer, a clock carried by a moving body would appear to slow down and the body itself would contract in its direction of motion. Basically, he hypothesized that time is relative to where you are in the universe. This theory eventually led to the famous equation E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. He is also well known for his theory of general relativity, where he found that gravitation is a warping of space-time by objects. This led to the foundation of modern astrophysics and theories of black holes, wormholes, among numerous other uses. He won the Nobel Prize in 1921 for his theory of the photoelectric effect. This discovery showed how light is made up of packets of quanta. Before this, various other theories had been postulated as to what the hell light was actually composed of. Since light travels at, the speed of light, it's very difficult to pin down exactly what it is. Anyway, Einstein obviously is one of the most renowned scientists the world has ever seen, and over his career, he thought about some of the most fundamental questions relating to our existence, questions which still perplex humanity to this day. One of Einstein's most famous utterances was, quote, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts, and feelings as something separated from the rest. This is kind of an optical delusion of the consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons closest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." End quote. Einstein said this in a 1950 letter to his friend Robert Marcus upon the death of his friend's son. And in these condolences, we find mysticism at its finest. We are all connected. I particularly like the reference to the optical delusion of ourself. It reminds me of the poetry of William Blake, who wrote, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." This is from William Blake in 1790, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, I believe. This poem, along with Aldous Huxley's essay, The Doors of Perception, were major impetus behind the 1960s rock band The Doors, which astute listeners of our podcast will remember was in our podcast a few weeks back about the novel The Heart of Darkness, and the fact that their music was inspirational in the theme of the movie Apocalypse Now, all of which had major mystical implications. Ride the snake, to the lake, the ancient lake, or down the Congo River as the case may be. Anyway, check it out. I do love that song. Although this quote by Einstein is indeed quite profound, noting how we are deluded into thinking that we are individuals, are separate from other things, talking about compassion for all of existence, etc., etc., my favorite quote of Einstein's is a little bit different, and he said, quote, "Two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not so sure about the universe." End quote. So, Einstein apparently also had a deep sense of humor. This quip was apparently relayed from Einstein to influential Gestalt therapist Frederick Perls, who documented it in one of his books. There were numerous other mystical quotes from Einstein, but again, I had to condense all of this for sake of brevity. Otherwise, you would be listening to me speak for 6 hours. And in fact, what would probably happen is I would just lose everyone. But anyway, continuing our chronological discovery of these great minds, we come to Sir Arthur Stanley Eddington. Sir Eddington was born in 1888. He was an English astrophysicist and mathematician. He apparently was also knighted, hence the name Sir. He was working during Einstein's time and spent a lot of time and energy confirming the theory of general relativity and further extrapolating on Einstein's findings. He was also heavily involved in the early movement towards the discovery of quantum mechanics. There's something called the Eddington limit, which is named for him, which is the natural limit of luminosity that stars have, or the radiation generated by accretion onto a compact object. Don't ask me what that specifically means. I'm pretty sure the first part just means he came up with a theory of how bright stars could get. And the second part, yeah, I just don't know. But anyway, this dude was quite smart and important to the history of science. In addition to his many scientific achievements, like the others, this guy was a mystic philosopher extraordinaire. My initial survey of this dude came to like 4 pages of quotes from various sources. I'm just going to share 3 of them with you. In the first, Sir Arthur Eddington actually comes out and basically says he's a mystic. Quote, "Whether in the intellectual pursuits of science or in the mystical pursuits of the spirit, the light beckons ahead and the purpose surging in our nature responds." End quote. He also said, quote, "The physical world is entirely abstract and without actuality apart from its linkage to consciousness." Finally, he channels a little bit of Shakespeare with, quote, "We walk the stage of life, performers of a drama for the benefit of the cosmic spectator. As the scenes proceed, he notices that the actors are growing smaller and the action is getting quicker. When the last act opens, the curtain rises on midget actors rushing through their parts at frantic speed. Smaller and smaller, faster and faster, one last microscopic blur of intense agitation, and then nothing." End quote. Comparing this to Shakespeare, of course, who famously wrote in Macbeth, "Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." It sure seems like Eddington was purposely paraphrasing Shakespeare here. A bridge between the mystical writer of a play first performed in 1606 with the commentary of an astrophysicist in the early 20th century, both noting how the world around them is like a play. It's illusionary, and you can move beyond it. All right, so, okay, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to do my best to move these along. Moving on from Sir Arthur, we get to Max Born. Let's see, 1882 to 1970. Like Einstein, who was born German and Jewish. When World War II started, he immigrated to England and worked at Cambridge. He won the Nobel Prize in 1954 for his work on helping to found the field of quantum mechanics. From Max Born, we get, quote, "I'm now convinced that theoretical physics is actually philosophy," end quote, and, quote, "Those who say the study of science makes man an atheist are rather silly people," end quote. Also, quote, "We have sought firm ground and found none. The deeper we penetrate, the more restless becomes the universe. All is rushing about and vibrating in a wild dance," end quote. His contemporary, Niels Bohr, was a Danish theoretical physicist. He received the Nobel Prize in 1922 for his work in early quantum theory. He founded the Institute of Theoretical Physics at Copenhagen University. Also, like his contemporaries, he dabbled in philosophy. Quote, "A physicist is just an atom's way of looking at itself," end quote. And, quote, "I myself find the division of the world into an objective and a subjective side much too arbitrary. The fact that religions through the ages have spoken in images, parables, and paradoxes means simply that there are no other ways of grasping the reality to which they refer. But that does not mean that it is not a genuine reality, and splitting this reality into an objective and a subjective side wouldn't get us very far," end quote. Phew. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually, what these scientists start talking about after years and years of study. It's almost like they start sounding like yogis or monks or something. Anyway, kind of blows me away. Next is one of my favorites, Erwin Schrodinger, mostly because he has a famous cat named after him. Schrodinger was also a theoretical physicist who worked on early theories of quantum mechanics. He was Austrian, born in 1887, died in 1961. Like some of the other scientists, he fled Nazi Germany, although his story is maybe a little bit more complex. But he ended up in Dublin, Ireland, where he was the director of theoretical physics at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. He's also a Nobel Prize winner, winning it in 1933 for his work on atomic theory. In Letters with Albert Einstein, he came up with a thought experiment that became known as Schrodinger's cat. And I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right. Let's see. In Schrodinger's original formulation, a cat, a flask of poison, and a radioactive source are all placed in a sealed box. Trigger warning here, the cat might die. If an internal radiation monitor, such as a Geiger counter, detects radioactivity, a single atom decaying, the flask is shattered, releasing the poison, which kills the cat. I do feel sorry for the cat. If no decaying atom triggers the monitor, the cat remains alive. Mathematically, the wave function that describes the contents of the box is a combination or a quantum superposition of these two possibilities. Yet, when one looks in the box, one sees the cat either alive or dead, not both alive and dead. This poses the question of when exactly quantum superposition ends and reality resolves into one possibility or the other, end quote. In other words, okay, so if you stuff a poor cat into a box, that cat technically is both alive and dead until you or someone else, an observer, takes a look. This crazy theory became one of the bedrocks of quantum mechanics when describing particles on a very small scale. Subsequent experiments have determined that indeed, particles are not matter, but a wave, and that they don't coalesce into a final state until an observer causes them to collapse. Does this make any sense? Schrodinger was quite the philosopher and could write an entire book on the subject of consciousness and the philosophy around it. And his account neatly aligns with the tenets of mysticism we described earlier and what some of these other guys have been saying. Quote, there's obviously only one alternative, namely the unification of minds or consciousness. Their multiplicity is only apparent. In truth, there is only one mind, end quote. This from Erwin Schrodinger. On another occasion, Schrodinger just said flatly, quote, the total number of minds in the universe is one, end quote. Let's reflect on that for a second. The total number of minds in the universe is one. I mean, whether or not we can even grasp that, it just blows that one proverbial mind. So here we have one of the greatest scientists of all time is telling us that there's only one mind in the universe. Again, suggesting that all is one, that consciousness pervades everything, blah, 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 blah. To further expound on this, Schrodinger said, quote, consciousness is never experienced in the plural, only in the singular. Not only has none of us ever experienced more than one consciousness, but there's also no trace of circumstantial evidence of this ever happening anywhere in the world. And one last thing he said, which I wanted to note here, quote, the present is the only thing in the universe that has no end, unquote. In other words, there is no past and there is no future, only the present or the now. This, of course, is a phrase common with New Agey type people and among the mystics. If you practice hard enough at meditation or whatever your chosen path is, teachers will tell you that you will live in the present or in the, now. This is akin to the state of enlightenment or nirvana. In other words, you lose interest in the impact of the past and you no longer worry about the future. Okay, so let's end with just a few others that we have here and then get back to our original question. Let's see. All right, another Nobel Prize winner and founder of the famous Heisenberg principle, Werner Heisenberg, said, where am I? The first sip of natural science will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God awaits you. He was also a quantum mechanics pioneer and theoretical physicist. Another, quote, reality grows out of observation, and thus consciousness is participatory with reality, end quote. This comes from John Wheeler, an American physicist, professor of physics at Princeton and later at the University of Texas. He figured out various things about black holes. He participated in the Manhattan Project, making major contributions to fission theory, and eventually to the creation of the atomic bomb. Okay, so I was thinking that perhaps this phenomenon was related to only those who studied early quantum theory, since the field of quantum mechanics was and is so crazy and perplexing that perhaps it drove these guys mad. So I decided to try to look at some more modern characters, and indeed, the persistence of this philosophic thought has continued. For example, Roger Penrose said, quote, Somehow, our consciousness is the reason the universe is here. He's also a Nobel Prize winner, University of Oxford professor, and co-author of the Penrose-Hawking singularity, which is a theory he shared with another famous scientist, Stephen Hawking, which basically predicts when black hole singularities will appear. Later in his career, Penrose went on to pen various theories and books about the possible connections between consciousness and quantum mechanics. Another, Carl Sagan, who's a famous astronomer, astrophysicist, and sci-fi writer. Quote, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself." End quote. This, of course, harkens back to Niels Bohr, quote, "The physicist is a way for the atom to look at itself." End quote. Carl Sagan also said, quote, "Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality." End quote. Finally, the face of American physics today, perhaps, is Neil deGrasse Tyson, who said, quote, "We are part of this universe. We are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both of these facts is that the universe is also in us." End quote. Now, I've listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson speak on numerous occasions, and I don't think I would assign the label mystic to him. In fact, I think he would get angry having that label assigned to him for some reason. So he's either parroting the giants who came before, or he has a subconscious understanding of some of this stuff. But in any event, he seems to feel the idea that everything is part of a whole is an established fact in cosmology. So what is so special about all of this? What does this mean? What are we even talking about? I think when you think of scientists and religion, you expect them to be separate and distinct studies. For those who follow religion zealously, to be anti-science, for scientists to be, I guess, atheists, for lack of a better word. That is, for scientists to conclude that there is a deterministic function to the universe governed by mechanistic laws and mathematical models, that everything can be predicated with the proper computer algorithm. And you would expect this atheistic type belief system to grow as a scientist gets further and further up the scientific ladder. The more science you ingest, the more atheistic you become. But it seems, and this is, I think, what drew me to doing this subject for the podcast, it seems that the opposite is true. Perhaps, as Max Born said, those who say the study of science makes man an atheist are rather silly people. As these giants of theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, and astrophysics rose to the top of their respective fields, they became even more circumspect, even more mystical, as it were. Their philosophies began mirroring many of the great spiritual traditions. I think there is comfort in this fact, that many of the great spiritual traditions share traits with our leading scientists. I also think there's comfort in the fact that you can hear a physicist speaking and hear the words of Shakespeare, or the poetry of William Blake, or the music of the Doors, that all of these masters of their objectively different disciplines will be saying the same thing, but through different forms of art, as it were. It does cause me to wonder whether the practice of such intense thought, that is, working to understand the mechanical processes of creation itself, is in and of itself a meditative practice. Based on what so many of these practitioners are saying, it seems like it is. So, it seems the answer to the question we started with is here. The original question we sought to answer was, as scientists delve deep into their studies examining the fundamental questions of the universe, of existence itself, do they become more reflective, more spiritual, more religious? The answer, it seems, is yes. The provocative headline read, "Was Einstein a mystic?" What do you think? Thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more content like this.